Oh, what marvelous news we're going to start off with this morning. I can't think of better news. Anything calculated to make you authentically feel good. By the way, how long has it been since you felt good? I mean a natural goodness, where it came to you, where you didn't go out and contrive it, try to build it, and then said, I feel good because I got the raise after walking around with a picket sign for 10 days. Or I feel good because someone finally wrote to me that I wanted to write to me. Nice friendly letter. It's been a very long time since you felt naturally good. Even children have it more authentically and more frequently than an adult. But you do have to grow up and go through so many things in order to be even on a lot higher plane than the simple pleasure that a child has in being natural. You can't remain with childhood natural pleasures. There's something much higher than that. Now, this news that I'm talking about is that right now, at just a little bit after 9 o'clock in the morning, you can start your life all over. I tell you that you can start this morning as if you've never had a problem in the past at all, nothing nagging at you. Now, you tell me what the word fresh means. What does the word new means? It means new, just that, something that has no relationship to anything that you already know. You see, this is the problem. All you're doing is repeating the life you've always had. Now, what's the difference between a heartache, a stab of pain when you were 10 years old than one you had when you were 20 or 30 or 40? No difference. Pain is pain, right? And so you simply repeat the same pains over and over, which is always the old. You have an opportunity right in front of you right now to try to break through, to understand what it means to start fresh. Start fresh means, and I'm going to illustrate it as best it can be illustrated physically, which is not very adequate, but you do the best you can on the physical level. To start life all over right now, I mean all over, what you do is that you relax where you are, and your arms and fingers are relaxed, and you're not looking at anything in particular. You're conscious, but you're not looking at any object in particular. You're looking out there. And as you sit there, you understand that you do not have to be seated here thinking. Because when you think, that's always going to be what's old. That's always what's going to be that's troubled you. You're always bringing up the past and bringing it into now so that you don't really have a fresh now. So you're seated here. And you understand, you can be physically aware of everything that's going on in the room. You can be aware of yourself seated here. But there is no nagging thought that's pounding on the inside. And if you do that long enough, just sit here and understand that you don't have to be thinking about yourself. The first thing you'll be conscious of is the fact that you are thinking about yourself. What are you thinking about? What you're going to do this afternoon? What are you thinking about? What's something you want to accomplish that you haven't been able to do up to this point? You'll be very aware that your thoughts have indeed taken over and dominated your life, which is what makes it the dreary life that it is. Now, this is a start, and you can always start. And you can start over right now. 5 minutes ago, I said you could start right now. And 5 minutes from now, you can start again, a half hour from now. Look, you see, I can't explain the beauty of it to you. Anytime you remember that you can start life over, you can. It happens the moment you understand and see that you can do it. You don't have to be you. That's the marvel of it. Look, being you, what has it got you? I'll tell you what it's got you. It's got you those sad faces that I saw all this morning. All those wondering and wandering eyes. Wondering how you ever got mixed up in this life in the first place, and in particular with all those horrible people that you got involved with. If you want the answer to that, you got involved with horrible people because you're a horrible people yourself. Horrible people associate with horrible people. Like attracts like. You are what you meet. You are what you love. You are what you hang around with. We then work on what I've said so far to see that no less an authority than truth itself says you don't have to be the familiar you right now. And there's a certain process, a certain stage that you'll have to go through over the months, over the years, whereby you start, as I said earlier, to understand that you are thinking thoughts, self-thoughts, of course. You're always thinking about yourself. When you think about another person, it's relation to some advantage that you might get. You see the process that you're thinking about yourself, and you say, hey, that's true. That first stage, that first exercise that I'm supposed to practice is accurate. There it is, right in front of me. Now I'd like to go on to the next one. And you go on to the next one, and you bring all these truth lessons into it, and you say, now, I also heard that my identity is not these thoughts. I am not those thoughts. They come to me, and I say they're mine thoughts. I say I'm angry. I say I'm happy. That's simply thoughts describing itself, not describing my real nature, which is hidden down there somewhere, but it's simply a repetitious nature encouraged by the mechanical repetition of thoughts. And so you go on and on and on, until you come to the breakthrough where for 1/10 of 1 second, thought stops, self-reference stops, and you know what it means to sit quietly and see what is going on both out and in without you being involved in it in any way at all. Now that seeing part is who you really are, your spiritual identity. Someone who's not a victim of anything. How would you like to cease to be the victim of yourself? Would that be nice? Think of the things that you've done to yourself in the last year, 5 years. Been pretty painful, and they've hung on to you, don't they? They climb onto you, just burden you down. And I'm going to go into something next that will make that clearer to you. Make clear the fact that where you have been is where your heart presently is. You're constantly going back to your first love, your foremost love, which is what you commonly call you and your past experiences, which is a dreadful thing to live with. Here is a man who was restless, and he wandered around both in his own inner spirit and in the outer world. He didn't know where he wanted to go or what he wanted to do, and he was depressed and sorrowful, and his heart ached. And one day as he's walking down the street, he felt a sensing of something in back of him. And at first it was very faint, so he didn't look too closely, but finally he was compelled to turn around and look to see what was in back of him. So he turned around, and he was shocked to see that there was a shadow following him. Sort of a vague outline, but it was dark and clearly recognizable as a shadow. So in fear, he turned around and started walking a little faster and looked back, and the shadow was still following him. And he thought he could throw it off. So he quickly darted around a corner, went to the left, zigzagged a bit, and fearfully looked back. There was a shadow right back there again, just a few yards in back of him. If you think he was frightened before, think of his condition now when he suddenly became aware that something was following and haunting him. So this went on for a while, and his problem was, and you listen to this, The problem was not only did he have that haunting shadow in back of him, but he hadn't the slightest idea of what to do about it, how to get rid of it. It scared him. How'd you like to wander around and look back and see a shadow in back of you all the time? A silent shadow that didn't speak, but it was dark and menacing. It became so painful, he said, well, I've got to try something. I've got to try anything. So the first thing he thought of to escape the shadow was to go way on out in the wilderness where a friend had a cabin who would let him stay for a couple weeks. So he got the keys from his friend and drove on out, way out into the wilderness, and there was a nice, pretty cabin there and a pretty little creek running down in front of it. And at first, it seemed okay. You know, a new surrounding also gives you a little bit of temporary relief. You know, you move to a new city, you get a new friend or whatever, and for a while it looked just fine. But he didn't kid himself on this score. He still had back in his mind, I wonder if it followed me all the way out here. And he was afraid to look. He was afraid to look. But he finally had to do it. He was outside in the sand of the little creek one time and he decided he'd better face it once and for all. So he turned around and, of course, there was the shadow there hovering. Just hovering there. And when he walked, it would follow him. And when he stopped, it would stop. Have you ever been in a situation like that? How about the word loneliness? Does that hit with you? You know, you think you're going to go somewhere, you're going to go out there and write a book and play classical music and you're going to be happy, and all the time your heart is aching and you wish you were back somewhere else. You no sooner get there for 3 hours and you wish you were home again. You've all gone through that, haven't you? Well, now you know how he felt. And the ache again got so bad and connected with the fear of the shadow that he said, there's no point staying here. I'm lonely and scared out here. I might as well go back to my own home in the big town and be lonely and scared there. So he went back and he said, well, the country cabin didn't do any good. What I'll do is get a girlfriend. He hadn't had a girlfriend for a while, so he said maybe that would help. Maybe I need a little romance in my life. So he wandered around and he went down to bars and parties and he finally met a girl. And they started going together. And it was like the cabin experience. It was just nice for the first few days. They enjoyed each other's company. And then they began to see each other a little more closely. And that wrecked everything. Yeah, I had that experience. So they were down at the seashore one day and walking along. And he understood really inside that just getting the girlfriend wasn't going to take away the shadow. And to confirm it, he turned around and looked, and there it was in back of him again, following him. So he went home and didn't know what to do next, so he did anything. He had no logic, no reasoning. He had no spiritual logic up here in his mind. So he was walking down the street one day and he saw a religious building. So he said, as a little boy, he remembered the preacher talking about a higher power that could help people in trouble. So he said, I've tried everything else, I might as well try this. So he started going to this religious group and went to the talks and lectures and the little social groups they have. One day he was standing outside with a few of the people and he looked in back of him and the shadow was still there. So all the studying and reading and the hymn singing didn't do him any good either. His desperation was growing. You see, look, you understand the pain. You not only have the pain, but you don't know what to do. Will you agree with me that that is the horriblest pain of all? You don't know what to do. And you still think that you can find it somewhere inside yourself, and you never will. Why don't you stop? So he was still in his agony and walking outside one day. And he said, maybe I have been less than courageous. Maybe I'd better look at that shadow and try to understand it a little bit. So he said, that's good. So he turned around, and instead of at first glance turning back and shaking, he turned around and he forced himself to look at it. And at first it was all vague and hovering. He took a little step toward it, another step. He could actually come closer. It stayed in place this time. And he got a little closer to it. And he got the shock of his life. because that shadow looked an awful lot like him. Right? And he got closer and closer. And he knew there was a definite connection between him and what had been haunting him all this time. So he said, hey, this is great. And he remembered some philosophy that he heard somewhere, that recognition is power, and awareness and understanding will help you to get rid of your problems. He remembered that vaguely somewhere back in his mind. So this is great. I recognize that there's some connection between what I call me and that shadow out there. He said, how marvelous. I'm on the way to freedom from the pain. But he wasn't. That little bit of knowledge, that insight that he had that it looked like him, it did not change anything. Oh, he wondered if life was worth continuing. You ever felt that? Yeah, you have at times. Is it worth it, all the pain and the fighting? He said, I'm going to try to do what I can. So you know what he did? He did what you do. He started the revolving process all over again. He said, he's trying to kid himself. He said, that cabin out in the wilderness didn't do any good. I know it'll do some good, a cabin in the mountains. So he went out to the cabin in the mountains and looked back, and there was the shadow there again. Came back on home, and he said, I know it'll do it. Last time I had a blonde, this time it'll be a brunette. The brunette didn't work either. He said, I know it'll do it. Instead of that religious group down 1 block away, it's the religious group 10 blocks away. And he went down there and sat there bored and uncertain, wondering what he was doing there. And when he came out, the shadow was still there. He was at the very depths of despair, which is a marvelous place to be. It is a necessary place, and this is why you aren't making it out, because you were not there. You won't go through all these experiences and get disappointed and frustrated and hostile to see that nothing you do works. You're going to play it safe. You're going to try some little easy thing. Then if it doesn't work, you can say, the next time we'll do it. Or the next time, 10 times we'll do it. You refuse, and I know it, and you should know it. You refuse to exhaust your resources. The reason you do that is because you're not going to let go of the credit you want for saving yourself. You want to say, it is my mind, my thoughts, my ingenuity, my genius, my persistence. I made myself spiritual. God is looking down and he knows what you're doing. And that's why he doesn't answer your prayers, because they're phony. He knows who's praying. He knows perfectly well that's your egotism disguising itself as a spiritual student. He knows what's going on. So your prayers aren't answered. So in the very depths of his agony, he had heard of a man who knew the answers. Now remember, he'd gone through hundreds and hundreds of inquiries, gone to hundreds of places, and nothing happened except a repetition of the same sorrow. But he did one thing. If you notice all along, he's persisting, he's sticking with it. He is pounding on the door. I'm not going away until you let me in. If I stay here, I'm going to pound on that door for years. You are not going to say no to me, reality. So, you heard of a man who knew the answers. So he went to this man and he talked on and on and on, and the teacher knew that all the poor man could do was talk on and on and on, because he knew that the man was still in a stage where he enjoyed talking about his problems, about his agonies and his frustrations and how bad people were to him. And the teacher just sat there and understood everything. Finally, when the man got about half hour, the man got tired of blabbing, straight monologue all the way through. Finally, when the man kind of ran down a little bit, the teacher looked at him very quietly, and he just said one thing. And he said, learn to love truth more than you love the shadow. learn to love truth more than you love the shadow. And the man sat there and he took it down on a little piece of paper. Learn to love truth more than the shadow. But he didn't quite know what it meant. He had a suspicion that it was a right thing, a sensing that it was a right thing, but he didn't understood what it meant. And he asked the teacher a lot of questions, but the teacher answered very briefly and then said, you go home now and you look at that and you think about it and try to feel what it means. And I want you to know, sir, that it has an enormous meaning for you personally if you can see it. Learn to love truth. Phrased in another way, learn to be more interested in truth than you are in the shadow. So he went home. And he started studying truthful books that told him about the way out and listening to cassette tapes that told him the facts and how he could work on himself. And he had another astonishing experience, which was this. He found out that he didn't want to be interested in truth. He wanted to be interested in the shadow. How shocking. I know that the truth is what's going to save me. I sense it. But look at me. I'm putting all my attention. I'm putting all my energy. I'm putting all my fighting, everything, onto the shadow. What is going on? He found out something. As he continued to study himself, the truth, and as the impressions came to him, he found out another astonishing thing. He found out that every little bit of interest in the truth, reading a book, listening, going to lectures, he found out that when he had 1% of that there was 1% less of his interest in and negative fascination for the shadow over there. It was very dim dawning at the start. And he'd go walking down the street nervously, and he knew the shadow was back there. And he'd turn around quick and look. He'd walk for a ways, and he knew it was back there, and he'd look again. But every once in a while, as he walked and looking back at the shadow all the time and trembling from it, something else entered. And what entered was one of the 2 or 10 of the lessons that he was beginning to pick up by study. And he found himself actually thinking one time that there is indeed a higher power that will do for me what I can't do for myself. And he found out that the minute he was in that truth, understanding it, pondering it, at that moment he had no interest at all in the shadow. He forgot about it. He said, what's going on? You come to this experience and you'll know what's going on. You'll find out that it is indeed true that you can't save yourself. You've tried to get rid of the shadow 1,000 ways. What a marvelous revelation to suddenly let go and understand that if you do what you're supposed to do, which is study and read and ponder, try to understand the difference between right and wrong. If you do that very occupation, being spiritual, excludes, as much as you can do at any particular moment, excludes and pushes out all interest, all fascination in what has been destroying you, which is the shadow, which is you yourself. What a moment it was for him when he realized that. I don't have to strain at anything. All I have to do is simply sit down and read this, which is now beginning more and more interest every day. All I have to do is make myself go physically to a place where the truth is being explained. That's what I have to do. If I do what I have to do, something will happen automatically, spontaneously, naturally inside of me. And it will begin to make me more and more interested in the truth and less in the shadow. I've got it, he said, and he did have it. He understood that the shadow has to fall away from lack of attention, and it will. Now what gives you this lack of attention? Your attention on the truth. See, look at the mistake that's been made. Have you been making this mistake? Of course. Fighting the shadow. Fearing it. Keeping it alive with your intense interest in it. What's that shadow doing to me? See, you big egotist. Bragging about it, right? What's this shadow doing to me? It's scaring me. Look how cunning you are. Look how you've fallen right into the trap of the devil. That's what he wants you to say. That's the whole thing he wants you to say. What's that shadow doing back there? Now look. You have attributed wrongly. You've attributed power to darkness, to your very, very bad negative habits. You've attributed power to the devil because this is what you've had. Now I have given you a very concise path that you can follow from the very start. I don't care where you are. You can start exactly where you are right here this morning. And you can understand what I'm talking about because I'm talking about the truth which you are capable of receiving if you want it. Don't get trapped again by the thought that you have to do something that you can't do. How do I get rid of that haunting fear? Forget that kind of a strain. All you have to do is understand that you don't have to strain at anything. You don't have to look back and be scared. All you have to do is be interested in truth so that the little bit comes in and it pulls away your love for the other, which is the shadow, which is destruction, which is pain. This is God working for you. See, it's coming in. You've received it, and you will get 10,000 surprises over a year's period, 20,000. And what you'll find is that one day, you look back toward the shadow, because you haven't escaped it yet, you look back toward it, and you'll say, wait a minute, I believe that is a little fainter than it was yesterday. Yesterday it was horribly dark and thick. Did I see a touch of gray in that shadow, of a lightness? It's still fairly thick, but I believe I saw something different in it this time than I saw last time. I'm going to keep an eye on that, and you do. Another week you look back, absolutely, it's beginning to get thinner. It's beginning to disappear. And you know why, don't you? Because you're paying attention to what you should. But pay attention to what you're supposed to be. The shadow will disappear all by itself. This is the promise from heaven itself. Do what you're supposed to do. Don't ever again go along with the temptation to look back and quake. If you do, you have just built into your habit system the habit of looking back again and shaking. The whole world is taken over by this of just loving to look back at the shadow and screaming at it, fighting it, trying to get rid of it, and secretly loving the shadow because it is the individual himself. You understand that? That the shadow was the man himself. And when he began to understand that, then he stopped trying to get rid of it himself, and he followed God's instructions, which is to truly pay attention to spiritual facts, to higher statements, which will come in and do it for you. Now you can all take this, you can all start to work with it right where you are today. There's no excuse now for you staying where you are. It has all been explained to you, including the fact that you don't have to strain, and if you do strain and complain and fear the shadow, please recognize that you've made a mistake. Recognize that you've made a mistake and go right back to your studies. Come here more often. Read more often. Practice the exercises more often. I will guarantee you personally, each one of you, if you do this, the magic day will come when you look back and you'll see less of that shadow there and less until it disappears altogether. And when that shadow goes, all your problems go, every single one of them. Now there's something that you must understand. If you do not get this, if it does not become clear, nothing else can become clear. Very definitely, there are first steps which you must go at first. And here is one of them. You have no awareness that you love your own sickness. You have a great fondness, affection for what? You fill in the blanks, and I'll give you some examples. You cling to, you hug, you embrace painful memories. Now, how many of you have painful memories? You all do. You know that. Now, what a strange situation that you would deliberately torment yourself by running through your mind with emotion attached, running through your mind that awful, shameful, embarrassing, sinful, to use that word, experience that you had as a child, as a teenager. Now, what kind of madness is inside of you that you love that so much that it goes through you over and over again? The slightest association can set it off. You see a man, you ladies who had trouble with men when you were younger, you see someone who looks like it sets it off. You may not be conscious that it went off, but it's inside of you, and there's a stab of pain. That's because you never learned to pay attention to what's going on inside of you at the moment that's going on inside. You are in love, whether you know it or not, with your own torment. Now, I will tell you, that is sheer lunacy. So how would you have to describe yourself if you're going to be honest about it? A lunatic? Of course. What do you think a lunatic is? Someone who prefers where he is instead of moving out. You can move out. Now, if there was no way out, then if you stayed there, that would be it. Because there is a way out. Where you stay is pure idiocy. Now, it's going to take a long, long time for you to get it through both your mind and spirit, the fact of what I just said to you. Because your old nature, your devilish nature, which is now in charge of you, think it's going to cooperate with you? It's going to lie to you, trick you, deceive you, do everything possible so that you won't realize that you can do something else with your life. And it's going to tell you, now, we've had a nice love affair going all these years. We've been through so many tears and so many wrecked human relations, a marvelous love affair. Now, you're not going to give up your great love, are you? And you see, because you haven't followed instructions to sit down and read a truth book or come to a meeting or come to more meetings, because you haven't done that, you listen to yourself, you listen to your own sickness, and you obey that, and the matter is settled. You're going to stay sick and scared. Listen to me. Nothing is more important for you to understand that you unconsciously love what you presently are, which is a menace to yourself and everyone else. Try to become conscious of this fact. Look at it, examine it, be honest about yourself. See how much violence you have in you, how much bitterness. See how you don't want to come back to this class. And if you don't come back to this class, or you come once a month, I know whose power you're under. And I know why you don't come back. Look, why don't you say, please, could we have a meeting every night? I want out. That's how it should be. And if there isn't a meeting every night, you should have your own meetings all day long. 1,000 meetings a week in which you're teaching yourself by being receptive to truth. I've given you an open door that you can walk through, where you can begin to see what you really cherish, which is what is called variously you, your old nature, what has been tormenting and torturing you. That is your love. Only a person who wants to become intelligent will start to search out what we're talking about. If you want to remain stupid and therefore a victim of yourself, that's your life, that's your choice, and that's your responsibility. And of course you'll crab and you'll complain and you'll wonder why things are happening to you. There is no excuse for any human being on earth to remain in pain. No excuse at all, because truth exists, God exists, and he's shown you the way out. You are responsible. Take that responsibility so you can start being a decent person to yourself and therefore to everyone else. When are you going to stop? When are you going to stop right inside yourself, taking responsibility for the anger, for the childishness of everyone you meet, plus the world in general? Now, go over what I just said in your own mind. When are you going to stop looking out there and getting anger from the world, getting arrogance, getting anything wrong? When are you going to stop acting as if that has something to do with you? You now are doing that. What would you call it? Someone snaps at you. Someone doesn't like you anymore. What would you call it when you feel depressed over it? When you feel guilty over it? When you feel you haven't lived up to what other people expect of you? Why on earth are you dragging yourself into it anyway? I know why. Because you're afraid to be something other than what you presently are, which is a pretty sad condition. When's going to be the first time, the very first time, that something happens to you from that world out there, that bad news on television, that way your wife or husband looked at you, your financial news of a depressing nature? When is going to be the first time that you are going to be in command of the entire world? You think that's too much? You think I'm exaggerating? Just wait. When you are going to command the whole world because you command yourself, there it is right there. Will you understand how weak you've been all your life? You don't know it yet. Of course you don't. Because when you fall down, you don't take responsibility for that tumble. You flare up at somebody, or you cry inside, and you go off and hide in the corner. When's going to be the first time something happens to you, and you say, this is enough? Irregardless of what you and all the rest of you do, I am going to reclaim my life starting right now. I am so sick and tired of you leading my life. This is the end. I'd better tell you something, all of you. You've got a long ways to go before you can arouse that kind of right ferocity, where you're going to say, absolutely not again. Because something is stirred in you, something from another world, really. Something from another world has come to you, and you know that it is right. Therefore, your weakness and you're falling into alibis and explanations so that people will like you, you know that that is wrong. And by the way, did it ever occur to you that you can only know what is really wrong when you first know what is really right? See, you don't know where you're going wrong inside yourself and stumbling all over life and all over yourself because you haven't made that first small contact of what is right so that you can authentically see the difference in the two from yourself. So that there can be a seeing without a person doing the seeing. See, you're doing all your own seeing now, aren't you? All your reacting. When you get your feelings hurt, you take that hurt as being you being hurt and identify with it, stick with it, and that keeps the circle going. It's such a simple thought. Does this occur to you? The next time you have pain, how many of you have pain today? Raise your hand, all of you. Did ever this thought occur to you when a stab, it hurts, huh? Aches a little bit? Did it ever occur to you this simple procedure by which you can understand it and finally get rid of it simply by knowing that pain is not your life at all? But you want it to be. You see, you've fallen into the habit. And let me tell you another bad habit you've fallen into, which prevents you from climbing out of the ditch. You have started on this spiritual path, and you have said that you don't want to cry anymore, and you don't want to be at the mercy of the stock market going up and down anymore. And in your delusion, and I tell you this is a fact, whether you know it or not, in your delusion, you think all you have to do is grab happiness or grab some little fact and it will straighten itself out for you. That everything will change overnight. New people always think that. That's why they ask how long it will take. I want you to give careful thought to what I'm going to say next. Effective as of now, as students, spiritual students, who have declared that they want out, I want you to know a mistake you're making. Now, if you get conscious of this, you won't make it again. That mistake is when you say, I am tired of fawning, of being afraid, you never consider the opposition. And one reason you don't consider it is because it's too well hidden from you with your own ability to hide out from yourself. You do not see how powerful the enemy is. How strong is your own self-trickery. You see, you're afraid that if you glimpse and see how terrible the problem is, you're afraid that you won't have strength to confront it. Of course you won't have any strength. You don't have any all to begin with. Why are you talking about a degree of strength when you have none at all? You say, well, it takes 50% of strength, I guess, to overcome this problem. What are you talking about, 50% or 90% or 2% when you have none at all? You know that. In your heart, you really know. You really know you're helpless. And you are. And if you were to stay there helpless, I'll tell you, if you were to stay right where you are being helpless without lifting a finger to save yourself, you'll never, ever be helpless again. How's that for something to take home tonight? But you won't be helpless because your mind continues to operate and to take the place of intelligence whereby you can surrender your pseudo-intelligence, your pseudo-strength, and have something else to come into your life. Now, in just the following statements I'm going to give to you, you can begin to understand and have the opposition, the enemy, crumble. Listen to this. All you presently have now is a thought life. All you have is thoughts which you send out into the world hoping that they'll protect you, give you advantages, keep you at least moderately happy. but it doesn't happen. So I am telling you now, whether you're deeply aware of it or not, that all you can presently do is think. Now the next question is, why do you think the way you do? Why do you think in the negative, self-defeating, self-disliking, and so on, ways of thinking? It's very simple. You were born with only the capacity to think, and you never went beyond it. Someone and something piled all that junk into your mind. Now your mind operates clangingly and noisily and rustily with all the junk. Having nothing else, you do what you call doing the best you can to get along in this world, never challenging at all what you're in. In other words, you don't ever take into deep consideration the vastness, the power, the false power, by the way, of the enemy. I invite you, therefore, tonight, to begin to study the several facts, that first there is great opposition to you achieving what you want inwardly. Secondly, that you of yourself, with your own thought efforts, can't do anything to dissolve the enemy. What you can do on the level of the intellect, and you can do this as a start, it's not the end of it by any means. What you can do is begin to understand the enemy, which is simply the fact, take it all together, which is simply the fact that you live by a thought life and wonder why it doesn't work. Why do you ask a stupid question? Why doesn't it work? You want it to work so that you can get the credit for it. So that you can be the center of all your thinking. You know what a spy is, don't you? An army spy goes out and his task is to go out into the enemy army, cross the lines and find out how many troops they have over there, how many tanks and how much ammunition and where their supply lines are, to get all the information about it. And that information, now we're talking about spiritual things, the information that you gather will lead you to something that is higher than this thought life we talked about, which is the only power capable of putting an end to the false thought life, because you have, to use a war term again, you have surrendered. Remember how I started off this evening? I ask you when you're going to surrender to your pretense that you know what to do with that pain when your husband left you. Your pretense that you know what to do when your career doesn't work out. Your fakery is incredible. You reach for something and you, listen to this. A man or a woman has a shock of some kind. And he says, my depression will make me feel better. So he goes into depression. Do you know what he's really saying? My depression will assure me that I will continue as the self-labeled entity that I have called myself all my life. You better listen to me. Your great, overwhelming mistake which prevents you from changing is your insistence upon self-continuance. Continuing with these thoughts, with these demands, with these petty, childish little attitudes, depending on them to give you the illusion that you're going in a certain direction and you hope that one day you're going to come out where things are different. You see, as I was talking just now, the thought came to my mind that you might have said, eventually I will reach the light. You have no such intention at that at all. People who live egotistically, who have only a thought life, have no idea what the light is. How can darkness know what the light is? And so you trick yourself, and you're doing this, and the world is doing this, thinking that they really want something better. And they don't want anything better at all. They're quite satisfied with the way they are and with what they're doing. Follow the following. As a bit of this information that we're talking about, where you can begin to see how severe the opposition really is and what you can do about it. How many of you felt uncomfortable today? You know what it means to be uncomfortable? All right. You felt nervous over something. You felt distressed over something. Did it ever occur to you to not refer to yourself for a solution to the discomfort? It didn't, did it? I'll tell you why. Because you have a mind that works like lightning. And the reason it works like lightning is not because it's brilliant, but because it's desperate. Having met a situation which made you uncomfortable, what was it? You met a stranger. You got into a new kind of circumstance. Someone didn't behave the way they usually behave. They didn't smile at you or whatever. So you had this feeling of discomfort. Immediately, self-desperation sets in. And that's an apt phrase, self-desperation, because the self is involved in it. Self-desperation steps in and it says, better fill up the gap. Better fill up something that gave you a sense of loss. While you were expecting that other person to treat you nicely, while you were expecting the stock market to go up, you seemed to be okay. As a matter of fact, you were exhilarated over the fact that the stock market might go up or that someone might smile at you. You were looking hopefully toward that, were you not? You felt good. You felt affirmed. You felt okay. I said you felt okay. You were not. When are you going to learn that opposition, that you still think that you're your feelings? That you still identify with them, that you say, I feel good. Do you know that, listen, let's take a big leap. When there is an atmosphere, I'm going to avoid the use of the word feeling, or it'll get confused. When there is an atmosphere within you that all is well, that everything is really okay, it is not an emotion at all. Unless you want to use the word emotion, call it a higher one. But I'll tell you, and you tell me, that it is nothing at all, have nothing at all in common with the old emotions that you used to experience, that you felt good about because you made an extra $50. Why don't you see that this is your life? It happened today. And you didn't notice it happening. And you didn't know that you were at the mercy of your ignorance. Furthermore, you're afraid, as was mentioned briefly before, that if you investigate too deeply into your ignorance, you just might have to do something different. You just might have to go through a lot of pains that you never knew that you had inside you before. Shall I tell you what it's like? It's like going outside and seeing the door to hell leading way on down there, going out there and being afraid to open the door down into the cave and looking inside. Shall we add a little more to that? The jewel of everlasting security. Listen to me. The jewel of everlasting security resides 10,000 miles down, right in the middle of the fire of hell. And if you don't go down there, you're not going to get it. Rephrased, if you go down there, you're going to get it. You go all the way down there, braving it. See what happens when you take the first few steps is you're terrified that you are going to be consumed. Right? I know what happened to you today. Well, let's see. Let's just pull a figure out of there. About 100 times you were afraid that some situation was going to consume you, and so you acted from your thought self to protect yourself, and you felt better, and then you went back to that same repetitious process again. Why don't you get it over with once and for all? Why don't you begin to see something higher than what you've been doing before? And there's one way to do that. See, you're not going to get it 10 steps down. Some people can come to a meeting like this and maybe feel a little bit disturbed, a little bit anxious, and then they go away, or come back here and still go away. What's it going to take to get it through your minds that you're going to have to go 100 miles, 200 miles, dare the loss of something new each time? And every time you're going to go through the feeling that something is being taken away from you. You're losing something. Of course you're losing something. I will tell you, at a certain point in your descent into the hell, which is your own nature, of course, there will come a certain understanding in which you see what is really happening in your descent to get the jewel way down inside there. And you understand that what is really happening is not the loss of anything real, but the loss of everything that is false. You begin to understand that what's being taken away from you is something that your spirit wants to fall away, but which your old nature still yearns for. Take the phrase, negative yearning. What happened to you today that you could have used to allow to burn up something inside your mind, inside your emotion, allow to burn up something false, but you were afraid of it. And so you clung to it instead of letting it go, where you could have got the feeling that a good thing happened to you instead of a bad thing. I'll repeat a clue to you where you can overcome this resistance, this horrible resistance to letting go. Look how logical this is. I said you have a thought life. You think all day long, right? Now, that thinking is not happiness, is it? It's not happiness, is it? Therefore, can you simply see that thinking is not going to do it for you? Can you see that no matter what you think, I don't care if you're elected to the highest office in the land. I don't care if your stock went up 100 points. Can't you see that self-exhilaration is simply not contentment? Now you're afraid, even afraid of the word contentment, because you associate it wrongly with dullness. See, having a false idea of what it means to be happy, which in your mind means running around getting things, acquiring things, then the opposite of that would be quietness, would be contentment, which you then fear because you have the idea that there is nothing of the old self in it, which is a fact. I'll tell you what contentment is. It's being able to go through life day by day, understanding the outer world, understanding the inner world, so that it makes no difference what the physical body meets out there, and it meets thousands of things every day, doesn't it? It makes no difference what the physical body meets. It has no attraction to you because you are not lacking a thing. A hungry man will do anything to get food. He'll rob, he'll kill, he'll betray people because he says, I'm hungry and I have to have food. I've just explained to you the horrors, the hideousness of this world in which pseudo hungry people, hungry for more of themselves, go out and create conditions where they can feel themselves in other people, and they all suffer, and they all fall down, and they all cry. I've explained to you I have explained how you yourself are not only contributing to all the terrors of this world, but how you are contributing to your own. Now, contentment means, I will tell you what it means. Contentment means walking with God. Contentment means that you are not there to walk anywhere. You are not there to do anything. You are not there to acquire anything, to feel anything, to fight anything, to want anything. Now, if this description of a new kind of life baffles you, then there's one way to understand it, right? Which is to open that door in the ground that leads down to hell and to just start walking. Just start descending into yourself. And again, irregardless of what you see, of what happens to you, until you understand, when you get down at the very bottom, those thousands of miles, and you grasp that jewel, you understand the most astonishing fact I vow to you that any human being could ever understand. That really, from the very first step you took to descend down to the center of hell, from the very first step you took, there was never any danger to you at all. The only hazard was your idea of the hazard in relation to me, in relation to that strong habit system that you have built up over these years. Of course you're scared. Why don't you understand why you're scared? And if you understand why, you'll say, thank God. Instead of walking slowly down, I'm going to yell out, get out of the way, here I come, and you run as fast as you can. Don't look, please. Don't think, run. If you think, you'll slow down. But when you think, you'll say, I better be careful. I'm going to lose something. Of course you are. Now you've understood that to lose something is to gain something. The farther down you go then, the clearer the way becomes. And this is why all by itself, the farther you go, the more your speed picks up. The more you want to head fast down, on down where the jewel is. You've seen the mistake you've made. The mistake you've made is a false love. You have loved something only because it has become the only love thus far in your life. And to sum it up, the love is the love of the accumulated me. Now, let's make that a little clearer. Summary, sort of. You are nothing that you ever think about. You are not what you have thought about in the past. You're not what you're thinking about right now. You're not anything that you'll think about tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. You are not any pain you experience today. You're not any pleasure. How about the pleasure? How many had pleasure today? Did your stock go up? Someone say something nice. Someone gave you a present. Someone was pleasant to you, and you felt good. You were not the good feeling. See, you can test things. Your husband, your wife, your friend, whatever, was nice to you today. Now you're worried, aren't you? You are worried that tomorrow he's not going to like you anymore. She's not going to like you anymore. The stock market isn't going to like you anymore. You see, you are worried. I am telling you, you are not that you. Now, if you want to stay that way for the rest of your years, then just don't act upon the information you've heard tonight. But if you want to change, don't you dare ever again, never smile at anyone to reduce their hostility towards you. Don't you dare give anyone something so that they'll like you. Don't you dare to plan to find ways to be secure. Don't you lift another finger to save yourself, to keep yourself secure, to keep yourself going. As a matter of fact, run fast to not do those things so that there's no repetition of yourself, no building, no hardening. You have gone far enough in the psychological hardening process. So it's going to take a sledgehammer in this class to break through it. It is already hard, and you know it. All right, I'll tell you. We have got the sledgehammer of truth in this class. And I'll tell you, its power is more powerful than any hardness, any steel, anything, any psychological steel inside of you. You have to agree to let God start working on you. You have to say, all right, I'll go through the pain and the ouches. God, truth, reality, go ahead with the sledgehammer and knock off that steel that's surrounding me, that's keeping me in prison. And God, no matter how loud I protest or scream or say, I wish it hadn't started, don't pay any attention to me. Because you're going to do that. You see, you don't have any strength at all, do you? If you do that, then something that is not you will more and more welcome all the blows. And furthermore, and listen to this please as we close, as the blows come, you will understand that you can't find pleasure in your pain anymore. You do that and you're tricking yourself, and God knows that too. God knows when you even take a spiritual lesson and twist it toward your own egotism to try to hang on to yourself. God is not mocked, it says somewhere. God is not deceived. Invite the blows, take them. Go ahead if you cry, if you scream, go ahead and cry and scream. But please, please, don't believe in your cries and don't believe in your screams, because God doesn't. And that's why he can save you. Life is not what you think. This life that you occupy at the present moment is a vastly different situation, condition, than you now know it is. You do not know the real condition of even your own personal life here on earth. What you are doing now in your present existence here on earth is to think. You think about your life. And you think about the exterior world. And you think about your future. And everything that you think about revolves around a supposed center which you feel you must increase. This morning, I'm going to tell you a story that will start from the very beginning and take us step by step through the problem and then to the solution. The solution which can come to not only the way you think, but on a 1,000 times higher plane than that, in the way you see. So that you're not thinking toward life at all with all your conditioning and all your self-involvements and all your phony desires, but instead you see life and there's not an eye seeing it at all. Now here's the story. You follow along as I tell it, because at every stage there are valuable lessons. Here's a man, a father, who had let's say he had a cracker factory. Animal crackers, cheese crackers, soda crackers. A good practical business, right? They're practical businesses. One is to produce food for human needs. So the father built this cracker factory up to where it was a profitable and going business. And it was kind of out in the country where it was kind of nice and not too noisy, and the employees were happy working there. And after the business had been well established by the father, he asked his son to come down in the factory one day and get in a little quiet room and just had a nice, quiet father-son talk. And the father said, "Son, now, I have other things to take care of. I have other business to take care of. So I want to turn this business over to you so that you can take it and you learn the business. Eventually you'll be the manager of not only this business but and the others which I'll be building in the meantime. I'd like you just to come in every day and start at the very bottom and go on up the top. Learn everything about the cracker business." And the son said, "Okay, Dad." And so he was set up in his office down there, and the father went away to establish another business. The son wasn't at all interested in running the business. He said okay because he was always used to saying okay to his father. He wanted to please him and didn't want to get bawled out or anything. So he agreed with his mind but not with his heart. And since it was that way, the son increasingly spent more time away from the cracker factory, paid less attention to the bills and to increasing production, increasing sales. And he went out and played, like millions of people do when they should be attending to inner business. He went out and played. He went to the beach, and he had lots of girlfriends, and he went out to night spots, and he went gambling. That was his idea of what he should be doing with his life, playing. Because he said, when I go out, nightclub, and have a nice dinner, and then we go down to the horse races and all that, I have a certain feeling that gives me pleasure. That's why I do it. He understood that. I do these things because I get a pleasurable feeling from it. Now, what's that compared to going down to the office or walking down the rows of crackers and counting the cracker boxes and taking care of things inside the factory? I'd rather play. That playing is what gives me joy, pleasure, satisfaction. So quite naturally, because he didn't come down every day and take care of things, the business began to degenerate. Boxes of crackers were left outside in the sun, not in the rain, and everything began to go downhill. The father, noticing this, went down to the factory one day, and he looked around, and what he suspected was confirmed. Half the employees were just goofing off, taking 3-hour lunches, and the machines that broke down weren't repaired. Everything was going downhill. And of course, the business was becoming less and less profitable every day. Less crackers sold, less profit, right? Father, noticing all this, over a period of time, over a period of months, got together with his son. They were back in the cracker factory now, back in the quiet room where they were able to have a nice, quiet talk. And the father said, "Son, let's review what's happened since I turned the business over to you. Just step out in the balcony and look down, and you'll see the results of it." And the son, of course, was scared and what his father was going to say to him. And he understood that he had been irresponsible and hadn't been taking care of business as he should. Now the father waited a little bit until the son had calmed down from his initial shock of being confronted by his father over his irresponsibility. And I want you to listen to what the father said to his son. He said, "Son, now I want to tell you something which you won't understand at the start. But if you listen to me, just please listen. After a while you could understand. Son, I understand what you take as being pleasurable. I understand that. Going down to the races and running around, going on vacations and trips and drinking. I understand perfectly that is what you call pleasurable. Now, I want to tell you something, son, that might shock you. But I want you to know, whether you understand it or not, that I was a young man like you once. And I want you to know that what I'm telling you, I know from personal experience. And I'd like it an awful lot if I could save you the years that I went through, if you could just listen to what I'm about to tell you and start correcting yourself. And the father said, the greatest thing you could do for your pleasure, son, is to come down to the cracker factory every morning, put in a full day's work, doing whatever work there is to do, doing that over and over and over, and I will absolutely guarantee you that if you do this, and take a couple other extra things I'm going to tell you about in a minute, that there will be no human being on the face of this earth who will have more fun than you have. Your sense of pleasure will be absolute maximum. And the boy looked at his father and wondered what it was all about. And the father said next, now, I'm going to use a certain word, and please don't go into wrong reactions to it, associations with it, because I know you'll be tempted to do so. But it's necessary, son, to put this in a certain way, and so I'm going to do it. Now, the single most important thing that I have to say to you while we've been talking here for the last hour or two, the single most important thing I have to say to you is this. Just 3 words. 3 words. Life is spiritual. Life is spiritual. It's not physical at all. It's not financial. It's not sexual. It's not romantic, whatever the word is. Life is not in traveling. Life is not in anything you can see with your physical eyes. Life is physical, spiritual. Now, when you come down here in the morning, I'm going to explain to you what happens so that you can kind of put all this together that I'm talking about. When you come down here in the morning and you walk down the aisle and you see that some boxes aren't placed right, you call one of the workers and you say, sir, would you take this pile of boxes and put it down further? The rain might come in and hit them or something. And you'll go down a little further and you see and you're in the sales department and you look at one of the billboards that the company is putting out, and you look at the billboard very carefully and you say, no, that's not too good. It's not attracting the eye properly. The colors are wrong, or the shape of the letters in the ad are wrong. Let's correct it like this, Mr. Manager of the sales department. You're doing all these things. Do you know what you're doing, son? Let me tell you. You are beginning to be authentically spiritual, which will finally, if you stick with it, will make you the most happy human being on the face of the earth. No one will be happier, at least. Here's why. Happiness, real happiness, lasting happiness, resides in everyday doing something that develops your intellect, that develops your feelings rightly, that develops the way you see the world out there, that develops anything inside of you as true spirituality intended it should be. Now, you don't have to understand what I'm talking about thoroughly, because you can't. You can only understand what you yourself have personally experienced. I understand it, son. And I know that I can only tell it to you. But if you come down here and I tell you, you don't know what trouble is till you start running this cracker factory properly. You're going to have to fight labor unions. You're going to have to fight higher prices of the competitors who sell you your raw products. You're going to have to fight the competitors who have put a different kind of a cracker out on the factory. You are avoiding trouble. What trouble do you have down at the bar? You've escaped the world. What trouble do you have going down the racetrack and putting down your money on the horses? You have no problems, and you call that pleasure. You don't know how sad you are. You go home sad every night, don't you, son? And he kept instructing them along these lines. And I ask you now, do you understand yourself that life is different from what your present nature tells you it is? I see you shy people, and I know what you think life is. You think life is for you to have the pleasure of avoiding a confrontation with someone else. So you don't speak up when you should, and you put on a pathetic little appearance, sending out the message, please don't hit me again, right? When are you going to go wholeheartedly down to that cracker factory and run into all the opposition so you can see that you have no spiritual competence at all, and that is the cause of your misery? If you see that, there will arise the urge in you, enough of fooling around with my life. No, sir, when you phone me and invite me down to the party out on the yacht, I am not going. I've done that long enough. And I now sense that I am avoiding my life instead of finding out what it's really all about so I can begin to build it and grow rightly. How many people do you know who will admit that they're miserable? How many people do you know, including yourself, who will admit that they burn with hostility over the slightest thing? How many people do you know, and include yourself in this too, who think that it's a great pleasure to snap at someone else, to snarl at them, to sneer at them, to hurt them? Let me go into that a little bit. Will you make a project from now on? I want your heart to see this, not just your mind. Go out, and you go to the grocery store. You overhear people talking. You go where your relatives are, if you have to do such a terrible thing as that. You go and you watch how cruelly sarcastic people are. You watch how you make the smallest innocent remark and those sickies will grab it and make a sneering remark. You don't know how bad it is. Walking down the aisle of the cracker factory and facing all these things means that you knowing your own weakness and how you find pleasure in you doing the snapping or snarling at someone, where you see that being sour is exactly not the same thing as being happy. Now you're going to have to change your definition of happiness, aren't you? If being angry all the time, if hurting other people is not authentic happiness, then it has to be something else. And if it's something else, then you're going to have to drop what you're now doing and in the name of happiness. Truth looks out. and knows what to do instantly and always quite accurately. Wouldn't it be nicer to live that way? It can be done.